All right, we come to 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 7 through 11, which is a power-packed paragraph. There's so much rich divine truth here that we're going to take our time. Today, we're only going to cover verse 7, but I'm giving you the whole context to try to show you the big picture before we dive into the individual minutiae. So let's go ahead and just show you that there's a therefore in this sentence, which goes back to this statement, the end of all things is near, therefore. And then what Paul does here, because the end of all things is near, therefore he lists 5 exhortations to the church. Now let me just show you quickly what those 5 exhortations are. Number 1, be of sound judgment. So what he means there is think clearly. Number 2, be of sober spirit for the purpose of prayer. So what he means by that is to pray alertly. Then number 3, he tells them to keep fervent in your love for one another. So love fervently. The 4th one is right here, be hospitable to one another without complaint, which goes down here, show hospitality cheerfully. And then finally, our last one is, he's speaking about special gifts, employ it in serving one another. So serve faithfully. So what he's saying is, think clearly, pray alertly, love fervently, show hospitality cheerfully, and serve faithfully. That's the big picture of this section, but we can't really understand it unless we go back to the beginning statement. The end of all things is near. Now, what in the world did Peter mean by that? He wrote this over 2,000 years ago. Well, maybe almost 2,000 years ago. So what did he mean by the end of all things is near? Well, you've got 3 options to choose from. The end of the old covenant religious system is near. Now, if that's what Peter meant, he was saying that the Jewish age is coming to an end. The old covenant system, the Mosaic law, and all of its sacrificial system is going to dissolve. It's going to become obsolete very soon, and it did. And within about 5 years, the Romans invaded Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, massacred about 1 million Jewish people. And from then on, there was no priesthood. There was no sacrificial system in place. The old system was gone. So he could have meant that, but I don't think so, because verse 5 and 6, I don't have it listed here, but it's in those verses, it talks about the very end of all things, the judgment to come. And so the context would lead us probably away from this particular interpretation, although some have embraced it as they think the best one. Well, number 2, the end of our earthly lives. Peter could have meant that. The end of our earthly lives is near. And of course, he's writing to martyrs, or people that might be martyrs in the future. They were persecuted. They were suffering for their faith. Nero is going to come to power shortly, and Nero is going to develop or bring about a very deadly system of persecution of Christians. And so Peter may be saying, hey, our earthly lives is going to come to an end. The end of that earthly life is near. And even if you don't die for Christ, you're going to die in a matter of a number of years, 50, 60, 70 years at the most. And so because of that, obey these practical exhortations. Well, the third option is the end of world history. In other words, the world's going to come to an end soon. Jesus is going to return and this world will be no more. So the end of world history is near. Now, how could Peter say that if it's been almost 2,000 years and the world is still going on? Well, number 1, The New Testament says that this age of grace, the church age, is described as the last days, the latter days. It started at the crucifixion and resurrection of Christ and will go right all the way through to the end of world history. So we are in the last days, and Peter lived in the last days. And then secondly, Jesus taught the apostles that they needed to watch and pray because they did not know the day or the hour that their Lord would return. And so because Peter didn't know when Christ was returning, and because he knew he was living in the last days, he could honestly and truthfully say the end of all things is near. So take your pick. Those are the three most favored or popular options to choose from. I would probably go with number 3 if I had to make a choice. But anyway, the end of all things is near. Therefore, there are 5 things, church, you need to really concentrate on and focus on. And I'm just going to talk about the first 2 today. Think clearly and pray alertly. Therefore, be of sound judgment. Be of sound judgment means to think clearly. That phrase, sound judgment, means that you're in your right mind. It means to think sanely or correctly or rightly. It's the opposite of having a clouded or distorted judgment. It means your thinking isn't regulated by the values of the world. The world tells us, hey, you have to live for number 1. Make sure you get a big piece of the pie. You're not going to be happy without this. You need this to be satisfied, so live for now, not later. The world promotes the ideas of instant gratification and self-centeredness. It gets our eyes off of eternity and fixes them on the temporal. And if we follow the ways of the world, we're going to become like that little boy who fixates on a 5-cent toy lying in the gutter rather than on the $100 bill lying right beside it. So we need to make sure we don't go down that road. We need to think clearly. The end of all things is at hand. Our eternal destiny is about to be sealed. Our character is about to be fixed forever. When we die, if we have been mesmerized by the devil's trinkets and have not sought the things that really matter, it's too late. So, the only sane way to think in light of the fact that Jesus Christ could return at any time, or we could die at any time, is to get our priorities in order. So what are our priorities? I would think that our priorities, since the end of all things is near, is sharing the gospel, pursuing holiness, loving and serving the brothers, using our spiritual gifts to minister to others, developing a godly family. Peter says time is short. Think clearly. So that's our first exhortation here. The second one is be of sober spirit for the purpose of prayer. So pray alertly. Now, that word sober means not drunk. Of course, we understand that. A person who is alert and in control of his faculties. So Peter is saying something like, be of a disciplined, self-controlled spirit for the purpose of prayer. The King James puts it this way, watch unto prayer. In other words, be alert and watchful for the purpose of prayer. A drunk person isn't alert. He's under the influence, and he's not in control of himself or his faculties. So Paul links sober with being alert in 1 Thessalonians 5, verses 4-7. In Colossians 4:2, he says, devote yourselves to prayer, keeping alert in it with an attitude of thanksgiving. And remember, in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus told his disciples, keep watching and praying that you may not enter into temptation. So what does that mean to us? We need to ask ourselves, am I alert in prayer? Do I have a secret prayer life with the Lord? And do I strive to hold communion with God, the kind of communion that's worthy of His majesty? I should not settle for a half-hearted, perfunctory prayer life. One of the most important things I can do is give myself to prayer. The same is true for you. So prayer is the best way that we can prepare ourselves for eternity, having communion with God, being alert in it, meaning I'm I'm devoted to prayer. I'm keeping alert in it. I'm thinking about those real needs around me that I need to lift up to the Lord and intercede for. And so I would suggest to you, if you're having trouble keeping alert in prayer, do something active while you're praying, like walking. I love to go for prayer walks. It helps me tremendously just to get outdoors. The juices are flowing, blood is rushing. I don't get drowsy, and I can think more clearly as I'm praying. So here we have our first two exhortations. Think clearly, get your priorities straight, pray alertly, be focused and devoted to prayer, and we'll tackle these next three slowly but surely as we get back into 1 Peter next time. So may God richly bless your life.